This video that we're shooting today is being handled by Tim Hall-Reppen. He's been trained and is good at both taking and editing videos, and he's the son of Deb and Rich Hall-Reppen, members of our club. Thanks. So we're here at Rockler in Bolingbrook today, guests of Mark Hubble. We're doing a little snow woman head and hat. We're doing several of them, so we're gonna approach it differently than if we were just doing one. But we're making it from basswood, which is nice for its lightweight, not so nice for its ability to clean cut. So we're gonna have to do some special things to get clean cuts, especially in the end grain of this basswood. We're gonna operate with a steel dowel, a 3/8 hole already drilled, and a drill chuck. And we just force it on there. It's not hard to force. We bring up the tailstock with a 60-degree center, or what is sometimes called a project center, which generally gets itself out of the way for working on the right end when it comes to that. So first thing we're going to do is round it. And this is something the lathe does very well. In fact, it's the only thing the lathe can do, right? So we're going to run at about 2,000 RPM. It can be slower if you're not comfortable with 2,000. There's really no need to go faster. Okay, so we're going to start the rounding process. My hope is to keep it more or less parallel on the way down. I'll lock that. So we just gradually work our way down, trying to keep it more straight than sway back like I just did. So we keep working until we get it to round. Sometimes a good idea to stop along the way a bit to see if what's left is kind of uniform and parallel, and that seems to be the case, so we'll keep on going. Time to see where we'll use this pretty high-tech plastic vernier caliper, and we're just under 1 3/4 inches. Which is about the dimension we had to deal with. We're headed for 1 5/8 inches. See what that looks like. Not quite there. 32nd off. I can feel that this end is a little heavy, so I'm just going to try to straighten it up a little bit. I've gotten out of flatness. It doesn't take much when you're looking at the 64th to 32nd, because of course the cut is half of whatever the dimension is you're trying to achieve, so that should be about it. Yep, that's there. That's it. 1 5/8 inches all the way along. Now, if you could see when it was running, I'm not sure if it's visible, but you can see that there's a wobble in this line here, this edge, especially if it's slowing down, it gets to be a lower speed, it wobbles. It's because it's not perpendicular to the axis, and we'd like it to be. So we're going to kill two birds with a stone. One, we're going to make it perpendicular to the axis, and the other thing we're going to do is get a nice smooth cut on this otherwise raggedy torn end grain. And we're going to do that with the skew. I'll tell you what we're going to do before we do it. We're going to line the face of the skew, this bevel on the skew, we're going to line it up with the line we want to create. In other words, that line is perpendicular. If we did this, it would be perpendicular to the axis. and it's going to be flat and perpendicular, and we're going to love it. So we start out with the point being our major cutting piece. We're going to start out a little bit high, and after we've lined up that bevel, we're going to back it off about 2 minutes from 12 o'clock. That's because we only want the point to be engaged. And then we're going to pretty gently rotate the tool into the piece and try to cut the same amount of material off all the way to the steel dowel. And if we've done that successfully, we should have a flat surface that's clean cut. And it rocks a little bit. That means we have to take a little bit more off the center and leave the outside about where it is. Again, slow. Certainly want to maintain our line, and we want to shoot over the top of that steel dowel, or otherwise we'll be spending all the time resharpening our skew. So the point, we don't want the point to be touching that steel dowel because it's really hard, harder than the tool, so it'll make a mess. We're done, it's flat, it's time for us to use our story stick. Because we're not just making one, we're making several, and we're trying to make them pretty darn similar. So we have this story stick. Easier to look at a snowman this way than this way, but we have this snowman. And the lines that are important to us are identified here. We're going to transfer those lines to the blank using the end that we've just created as a perfect end as our register point. So every place we have a line that ends, we're going to put a little dot. For me, dots are easier than trying to make it a dash type mark because I never can carry the dash well. So there's that. Now I'm going to use a carpenter's pencil because it has a nice flat sharpened point that makes it happier to go around in circles against a rough surface without breaking off like the pointed ones can. So I'm transferring all those dots into circles on the blank, and I'll hold up the finished item again just to see, so you understand where those important points are. So there's our finished piece. So you can see that this is the center of the bead that makes up the head. And here's the bottom of the hat brim, and here's the top of the hat brim. And then the hat shape goes to this point and then rounds off. And all of this over here is waste. It's going to come away. It's there just to make sure if we had to make a few more passes on this end to get a clean cut, we'd still have plenty to work with. So that's what's important about the points you choose on the story stick. They have to be ones that you can locate, and also ones that will survive the next step that matters for you. And that's going to happen in all these cases. Now we're going to make the incisions for the hat brim, the lower and the upper incisions for the hat brim, and then we'll be able to connect the dots from these other lines to those points we've located at the bottom of the hat brim. So again, we're going to use that same skew cut. We're going to line up our bevel, we're going to rotate the tool, and we're going to lever it in. We're not going to push it in. Pushing gives us a lot less control. If we're levering, we're in much more control. Too big a bite there. No need to take a big bite. See what that measures before we go any further. We'll go in the top. Once you've established that initial straight cut, it's easy for you to go back to that point. Just make it deeper. So we're chopping is that incision. We're making that incision with a kind of a chopping cut, and we can measure how we've done in terms of the depth by the the lines we've got on our story stick. This one is for the under brim at 3/16, and this one is at for the upper brim at 1/4. So we just pop that in the slot. If it comes up to level, good deal. First try. This one is a little shy, so we need just a little bit more depth there to follow the story stick, make it look like all its friends. And so I'm going to not take very much off when I go down here, because I don't need much off. There we go. We'll measure that just to prove it, but of course, perfect. Let's see. Yeah, that's good. So we're done with the story stick now. And we're going to start with the bead and work up. And the bead, as always, is going to be turned leaving that center line. We're turning from that center line and from that center line the other way. When we're turning a bead, we start out with the flutes up, generally. We rotate the tool to engage just to the right of the tip, and then we move the tool to the right and inward as we're rotating it. There's three things going on at once. We're rotating the tool, we're moving in that direction, and we're moving it inward. All three of those things are happening simultaneously, and if that's not something that's easy for you to do yet, it will be in time. So we're starting flat, we're following basically a curve, backing up a little bit closer to the center of the bead, following it down a little further, and now, in this case, because it's soft wood, it's only taken us 3 passes to get ourselves all the way down to the underside of the brim. So that's the bead to the right. Everybody does better one way than the other. I do better to the right. I think that's often the case with right-handed turners. So maybe you have more trouble going the other way, but it's the same deal. You start out, rotate until you get something, move out and in. Back up a little bit, rotate until you get something. Well, I got a little more than I wanted that time, so I have to be careful now that I don't take too much off. I'm happy with that. That's pretty good. Now I'm going to go up here to the hat shape, if you wish, and I'm going to create that sort of chamfer, if you wish, with ending at the brim and beginning at this line second from the top. I'm going to work on that in the same way I did the other part. I'm going to not try to take it all at once. I'm going to go gradually, no race. I'm going to pay attention to how engaged that last cut. Get pretty close to the line. Sometimes the line disappears. And that creates most of the shape I'm talking about, except the top of the hat and the exclusion of this extra wood that we now have. I'm going to use the parting tool. Remember, the parting tool is a peeling cut, it's not a scraping cut. Some people take a parting tool and just jam it into the wood. That's neither its best choice, nor is it the most controlled. You start like this, and again, use leverage and rotate on the fulcrum of the tool rest, then you've maintained control all the way through that cut. And just to make sure we're transferring the lines to the center, we make sure this is flat, and it is flat, so we're happy enough with that. Now I'm going to make the next cut. I'm going to leave a little bit to the right of the line intentionally, because I want to make sure I get a clean cut on the top of the hat. So I'm going to start here. I'm going to pay attention to what the overlap is between the wood and the tool, and we're going to carry that overlap all the way down, which means it'll still be flat. Now we know to expect that it's going to be a bit raggedy, since I went pretty slow, it's a pretty sharp tool, it's not as bad as it might be, but it's still not a very good finished surface. So we're gonna start rounding the top of the hat. We're gonna keep in mind how much wood there is between that top line and the top of the wood. And when we finish our cutting, we're gonna cut away that much more to make it end up at the right spot. Does that make sense? Okay, so I'm going to start here again high, rotate and leverage down. It's not a race to see how much you can take off. So to go about there. Finish up at the top, but then I got to remember that I still had a little bit more to take off. So I'm going to the actual line. I'm engaging that with leverage, not with pushing. And I'm going to carry that, removing that extra wood that I left right up to there. The next thing I want to do is nibble away that tip so that when I'm done with the top, I don't have to worry about anything pulling out of the wood. Now we have a little adjustment going on because ordinarily when we're, where did I put that? Oh, there it is. When we're using this kind of approach, the chucks that are made for this purpose, the drill chucks, have a threaded end. And therefore you can run this through the headstock, thread it in here, have a big washer on it and tighten it up and hold it in the headstock so it doesn't drift. We didn't bring a long enough, I didn't bring a long enough threaded rod to go through this massive head on the Laguna 1836, so we're kind of running free. So the first thing I'm going to do here is advance this and make just a little divot, little point in the end. That's going to be where the hole gets drilled for the screw eye. And for that purpose I have a 1/32 bit. If you don't have a 1/32 bit, don't worry. Just turn in your Snow Lady heads and hats and we'll drill it later. But I do want that dimple because I want to know where that is going to get located. Now we'll be a little careful here because it's loose. That is, it's not retained by the drawbar. Just do this a little more because we're going to sand now. Turn it down a little bit. And I'm just going through 3 grits starting at 180. So when we're finished sanding, the line will be gone. Sanding a little slower keeps the dust down, and this dust, the dust from basswood, I mean, the wood is light, the sawdust is light. What a surprise. And that means it's floating around a lot if you're running at high speed and so forth. So if you have a dust collector in your shop, it should be running the whole time in this case, but it's especially important to have it run when you're sanding because of the lightness. The dust is floating around. Still seems to be holding all right. So here's we've got it. This is 220. Doesn't take very much to get rid of the lines at 180 left. And when we're finished, notice I'm rounding the top of this hat, whereas I'm leaving the other, the brim, if you wish, sharply defined. That's part of the style of the hat. So it technically is not 1 5/8 inches at this diameter up here because we've sanded it away. If you need to get into that corner there without leaving a mark, sometimes it's useful to use the folded end rather than cut end rather than the folded end. And remember that it's always spinning slower in the center, so you need to pay a little attention to that area especially. So, Another thing I would advise, based on my experience, is to get that out of there before you start trying to remove this. There's another one, just like the one we started out to make. So that's how you make more than one snow woman with a nice hat.